Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Fear the Old Lore, where we examine the English and Japanese text of Bloodborne, compare and contrast the differences between the different versions of the game to get a better understanding of the lore of the game. Yesterday, we finished up in Hemwick Charnel Lane in Cathedral Ward. We fought the Witch of Hemwick and defeated Vicar Amelia. And so we've pretty much done everything that we could through this portion of the game. And so the next area we're going to go to would be the Forbidden Woods. I think before we go there, though, we're just going to go talk to some of the NPCs to show off how sane they still are. We did finish with some of them last stream with like the little old lady crouched in her kind of a fetal-esque position. But their dialogue is pretty much the same. If you're not too familiar with what we've done through this playthrough, we've had Adela kill Ariana, so she's covered with blood. And I was wondering if she doesn't finish her quest and that she'll attack the player until after the blood moon. So we're gonna continue along with that and maybe find out when that triggers. I mean, I'm sure it's documented online, but I definitely don't do that very often myself, so it'll be a bit of a treat for me to actually complete that playthrough. So I guess I must have killed some of the enemies already. Or maybe its position just changed after beating Amelia. So we're going to go back up to the Grand Cathedral area first and talk to those enemies where the hunters were. And then if they're not all replaced by patches, we'll go to the ones over by where Ariana and the narrow-minded man were. So last time we came over there, or over here, they said, bless us with blood, bless us with blood. And so I think patches might show up now, and that'll completely change what they'll talk about. Right, so that is obviously not patches, and that sounds completely different than bless us with blood, bless us with blood. I've mentioned this before in the previous streams, but I take this as evidence that the Red Moon is always present and steadily having an influence over Yharnam as the night goes on, and the more bosses you defeat, the more deteriorated the mental states of the Yharnamites will be. And so these are almost like a bestial kind of shouts or growling. And this will be that wandering madness that I kept forgetting about. And it was pretty minor, you just had those blood shards right there. So we'll go back down to the kind of back avenue of Cathedral Ward. And now that it is the night cycle, there will be like a kind of change in the enemies. The giant church servants will be kind of sleeping. We already disturbed the one, so that's why it's walking around. But once we get into the next area, it'll be a lot more obvious what I mean by that. So they're no longer patrolling like they were. They do seem to be asleep now that the moon is fully out and the sky has turned dark, as opposed to like the kind of evening time that it was earlier. That's not good. So that should be enough where we can talk to these villagers in peace.
My baby! My precious little baby! Stay away! Stay away from us!
So before defeating Amelia, her voice lines were quite different. She was saying that she wanted to thank the Healing Church for all they did for her, although it seemed more like it wasn't very sincere and she was just trying to get us off her back. This dialogue is extremely different, and it does pose a lot of interesting questions, like what exactly happened to her baby? Has it transformed into a beast? Is it perhaps something similar to one of those celestial larvae that Ariana has and the ones that we can find in Upper Cathedral Ward later on? It's a bit unclear, and some people have also wondered whether or not this baby of hers was kidnapped from her, and that might be why she's so distraught. And some others have also thought that maybe Murgo was her baby, although I think that's kind of really unsupported by a lot of the kind of themes that FromSoft likes to push in their games. But just for the sake of entertaining those ideas, I figure I should include them.
Help me! Please help!
And then before he was saying, like, praise you, praise the whole damn church, and then so now he's begging for help, and that kind of pounding noise is still persisting. So it's a bit unclear if he's in the middle of transformation or if he just feels as though he's going crazy, and that's one of the things that we just have to deal with as we go along. Like, we don't always get perfect answers for the kind of questions that we may have, unfortunately. And so, coming into the next area, we're going to head towards the Forbidden Woods and go see Alfred. And the last lore through that we did, we went ahead and did all of his quest line fully by bringing him to Annalise. I guess we didn't let him like commit suicide over by Logarius, but it's a very minor change. So this time I do want to go ahead and attack Albert and cause him to become aggressive towards us, to just kind of highlight that his weapon is different than when he appears to us in Canehurst. And it isn't really just like limited to here. He'll be using the Kirk hammer as opposed to the Logarius wheel, which might imply that he's not as fully fledged an executioner as he might like to lead others on to believe.
Oh, good to see you safe. Now, let's think up something to discuss. Just tell me what piques your interest.
So, now we have a new choice of dialogue. We can learn about the corrupted Vile Bloods.
There's something I want to tell you. A bit of wisdom from the eminent master Logarius. Once, a scholar betrayed his fellows at Bergenworth and brought forbidden blood back with him to Canehurst Castle. It was there that the first of the inhuman Vile Bloods was born. The Vile Bloods are fiendish creatures who threaten the purity of the Church's blood healing. The ruler of the Vile Bloods is still alive today. And so, to honor my master's wishes, I search for the path to Canehurst Castle.
So there are a few slight differences that I'd like to bring up. He doesn't necessarily specify the gender of the traitor who brought forbidden blood to Bergenworth. That being said, I think it should be pretty clear that it was most likely Gehrman, because Gehrman was associated with like Maria and the Canehurst on that side, and in like the cut content of the game, Willem says like Gehrman betrayed him when he's talking to Lawrence, and in the Japanese version of the game, when we do have that cutscene with Lawrence's skull and Willem, Willem says, "Oh Lawrence, you will also betray me," and so just it shows that there was that traitor before Lawrence, and the most likely candidate is Gehrman, with all things considered. And aside from that, the idea of vile bloods is a bit presented more strongly in English. It's more just like the clan of impure blood in Japanese. And the final bit of his dialogue about to honoring his master's wishes, he searches. It's more like in order to succeed the dying will of his master, he's searching for the way to Canehurst. And the reason why I bring up the dying will in this context is because it could be that he is literally trying to inherit the blood echoes for Logarius. I think that is what is trying to be implied with that text, and you just won't really get that reading with the way that the English is presented to us. So I don't know if there's any kind of like religious significance to inheriting like a specific person's blood echoes, but that does bring in like a lot of interesting questions. And if he's ultimately trying to like free Logarius and release his echoes to the Hunter's Dream after he like kills himself, that's also something worth considering as well. So that's it for his dialogue right here.
I bid you farewell. It has been a pleasure. May the good blood guide your way.
And then we're going to go ahead and attack him, just to highlight that he does wield, I think it's the Kirk hammer, and I'm not sure what weapon or what like firearm he has, but certainly not the Logarius wheel. Okay, so he pulls out the Kirk hammer, as I pointed that out, and it looks like he's got the Ludwig's rifle.
You'll regret this.
So his combat dialogue is a lot more sparse in comparison to what you get in Canehurst, and when you loot his corpse in this location, you do get the Wheel Hunter badge. For whatever reason, if you fight him in his first location over in the other portion of Cathedral Ward by Old Yharnam, he does not use the Wheel Hunter, or he does not drop the Wheel Hunter badge. He just drops a couple more fire papers, which is kind of annoying, especially if you're like trying to get like the executioner items early on. So you do have to kill Amelia first in order for him to drop the Wheel Hunter badge, it seems.
The password.
So now that we have completed everything in the Grand Cathedral, and we've touched the skull of Lawrence to get the adage carved into our flesh, we now know that it is Fear the Old Blood. And welcome back, Sundry Saturn. Nice to see you again. We just defeated Alfred and talked to some of the NPCs in the Cathedral Ward to show that they've been going mad. And so the man behind the gate is already dead. And then he gives us a madman knowledge. It does interest me that we don't get like that kind of ambient insight that one might expect. So I don't know if we necessarily actually take a skull or whatever, or if just the icon of the madman's knowledge represents something other than what it seems, or whether or not like that corpse is holding a skull. Either option's pretty funny, all things considered. So now that we've gone through the gate, it seems as though we've entered the Forbidden Woods, and that password gatekeeper really doesn't have much to say because he's dead. And in one of the earlier drafts, he had a lot more dialogue, which I talked about in I think it was the last stream. So Sundry asks if it says already dead in Japanese. I think so. I would need to like double check to be sure. It's a little bit more tedious for me to like check like the prompt dialogue boxes, but I think it's on Dave Christie's game facts page. So yeah, just give me a second. I'll try to double check for you. Yeah, so it's Tsude Nishin Deiru, so essentially already dead. So thank you for asking that. So coming into the Forbidden Woods, we still have Yharnamites, Beast Boys, and these kind of butchers as well. So despite it having been like declared forbidden ground, there's really a lot of activity, probably a lot more than you'd initially expect, or one would initially expect. This brilliant ragdoll right there. So when we do come to the Forbidden Woods, it's still littered with a bunch of graves. These do seem to be different from the ones that we can find in Hemwick. They seem to be a bit more primitive, perhaps a bit older, and there aren't as many like embellishments, especially when we compare them to the ones in like the Cathedral Ward and that big old plaza with that gigantic statue that might be similar to the one we find in the Tomb of Erdin. So Sundry says, it just sounds humorous. Thanks for looking it up. Yeah, no problem. I really don't mind looking up that kind of thing, if especially if people have questions. And so we still have some carcasses of horses that we can find lying around. The ones in the Forbidden Woods are on fire, and they will stay on fire no matter how long you're in the woods. So I just kind of chalk that up to like spooky aesthetics, and to just go along with that, there are bird cages that do have like the remains of these tiny birds that are on fire as well. And you can even find some on the ground. And so if the Forbidden Woods was like sealed off a very long time ago, it doesn't make a ton of sense for like horses to be actively burning, and it could just show that perhaps the residents here started to transform over tonight as well, or maybe they've been transformed for quite some time. It's really unclear. One of the things, like environmental details that I really enjoy here is that we've got these figures of scarecrows with like boots on top of the little poles. And I think potentially one of the ideas behind that would be that if for some reason somebody did sneak out behind the pass, or like the gate, and they started to look towards the village, they might see like these figures over here on like the bridge, and they might get scared and go away. So it's probably more of a deterrent than anything, and it seems almost to be more in place to scare away humans, because I don't necessarily think like the beasts would really care if they were like scarecrows of people, especially if like beasts are thought to eat people or attack people. And so the Yharnamites' attire does differ slightly here. So this almost seems as though it's supposed to like represent like a white church set, although it's very different. Like it doesn't have like the holy shawl or anything like that. You could still say like the white gloves that they have might be like surgical gloves, although like the ones in Central Yharnam have this stuff as well. And he's got this really neat like cream top hat as well. So I don't think that's terribly important, all things considered, but it is nice that they did go through the effort of bringing in a little bit more variety to the enemies that we can see here. Coming into the woods, like kind of heading towards like the small village or the hamlet inside it, there will be these kind of booby traps lining the way. These are wooden planks stacked atop a pressure plate, so that way if you step on them, they will activate a spiked log trap, which can deal a ton of damage and completely knock a player off the cliff. It's pretty funny to fish for that if somebody invades you and you're able to knock them off, whether you're in the evader or somebody else is invading you. I thought there was something else I wanted to point out over here, but I can't think of it. Oh, we do have the windmills that were visible from the Forbidden Woods, or sorry, not the Forbidden Woods, but the Cathedral Ward. When we do look back towards Yharnam, we can see that the moon is still over the city, and it looks gigantic from this angle. The positioning of the moon does change as we progress through this area, and it's one of the things that I think is probably due to developer oversight, and I'll point that out as we get to it further on. So coming up here, it's kind of a bit of a dead end. We've got a Wandering Madness, surrounded by a bunch of crows. And it gives us some more Twin Bloodstone Shards. Wandering Madnesses will always give like Bloodstone Shards of some variety. I think there might be one that gives gems, although I kind of think that's wrong. I'm very confident that it's just the shards and like the chunks. So oh, that's interesting. We do have like a bunch of the Yharnamites kind of like on sentry duty, which would be like super annoying if you had this kind of job in real life. Just kind of always standing by, waiting for nothing to happen, and then when it finally does, shit hits the fan. So these guys are throwing oil urns at us, and so if we do get hit with like a torch, we would take a ton more damage. Or if we were to walk on those fires like a Goomba. So I did kind of go an indirect way into this area. So that's where we first came from. So that's where the beast guy was over there, and so this is like the more direct route. So we got another flaming horse, the corpse which we just picked up some I think it was frenzied cold blood from, and this is where all the Yharnamites were just kind of chilling by. Coming to this next little area, we've got some pretty interesting flora. We've got a bunch of like these yellow flowers that seem to be a little bit wilted. I don't know if there's a ton of significance to them. I've wondered if they are similar to the ones that we can find in like the Thumaru Chalice dungeons, and they're like little garden-esque areas. Ooh, we can see them like growing next to fountains. But that's more of like my best guess as to what these could be. They don't really match up to the kinds of white flowers that we find in the Hunter's Dream. So it could just be a nice environmental detail for all we know. So coming into this area, we will kind of be able to access the a side way into the kind of hamlet ahead, and these planks will give way and cause the player to fall down and take a negligible amount of fall damage. We're not going to go that way just yet, just to kind of show off the front part of the town. And I have wondered why there is this kind of like red glow on some of these parts of the forest. Like there doesn't really seem to be a rhyme or reasoning for it. I've wondered if it was supposed to show like maybe blood got spilled here, but it just kind of doesn't work out. I don't know if that's supposed to be like reflecting off of something or if it's on fire. It's just kind of strange. At least for this one, like this little grave right here has like a symbol of something like a hunter's mark on the top of it, but there is no like real good reason or explanation as to why the lighting changes so drastically in different spots of this map. So we finally get like our first kind of residence, although it's been like completely dilapidated. And we get some beast blood pellets, which could show like the nature of the Forbidden Woods was to conduct kinds of experiments or deal with taboo in general, since this is a taboo area. Perhaps they do produce like these kind of beast blood pellets here, and the church just denies it. So there's like a bunch of like wicker baskets, like wooden buckets and crates. So this is some like very agrarian type stuff, although it doesn't necessarily line up with like the bunches of wheelbarrows, and it almost seems like tar-filled barrels here. So it seems like tomb raiding was probably one of the functions of this village, of them like carting things away from the Chalice dungeons at some point when this place may have been more affiliated with Byrgenwerth. And I don't think there's anything up here. Yeah, just a little fence. So this brings us to the front of that little hamlet village I was talking about. There's a bunch of planks there, leading us to that kind of a spiked log trap, which I'd mentioned earlier. I think there's only 2 of them in the game, so it's just a little bit of variety as far as like level design goes. And we can see a lot more of the buildings up ahead. So there'll be a few Yharnamites within like the houses, and it's pretty easy to get ganged up on if you're not paying attention or if you don't know the area very well. Even if you do, it's pretty easy for someone to like kind of sneak around in your blind spot or see you with without you seeing them. So that guy was just chilling, reclined next to the building. Just kind of reinforces what I was talking about. So it seems like these guys are just kind of like looking at the horse very confusedly, but not a whole lot to say about the general intelligence of like the common enemies. But also littered throughout the ground here, it seems like we've got like the skeletons of like maybe dogs or other small animals, maybe like people as well. Like these look more like rib cages, a bit hard to say. And then this bundled up section of planks will break away in a kind of a pitfall trap with a few crows at the bottom. Which does beg the question, like, how did they get crows down there? You'd almost think they'd be up in the sky. Were they just trying to seal away the crows? And that was the kind of like scaffolding that I was talking about earlier. So this is where we would drop to and come in from the side. That was weird. I thought I saw something move. There's an NPC in this village that I always forget where it exists, and she mentions like something. No, not the graveyard murmurs. I can't like. She talks about like a voice that she can hear, and she blames the hunter for it. And I never remember where she's at. I think she's over by the dogs actually, but I also want to double check all the residences to make sure that I've gotten all the items. So we get some more beast blood pellets. So we see like wheels and stuff. But everything in here does look pretty run down, all things considered. So coming up to this area right here, we've got like probably an oil-covered like pool of water, and you can see like the fire will linger. Although I suppose that's more like an effect of the Molotovs. But you just saw that the um, rotted corpse over there just took a ridiculous amount of damage just from a Molotov. So that's where we can kind of more or less confirm that it's filled with oil. So we're gonna go ahead and drop down to the pitfall trap and deal with the crows at the bottom. So we get some antidotes, which might come in handy because there is like a kind of a poisonous cavern next to this area, and there's really not too much else to that pit right there. And then there is a kind of like shortcut we can access to open up one of the buildings over here, and we'll get to that a little bit later. So you can go through the village with the way with the water, and then there's a more roundabout way up here. Almost fell down. Next to like a bunch of like dog kennels. I think there's like a loose one up here. Not the crow. I thought I was gonna one-shot it. And then up on top of this roof there'll be a few more crows. Should have kept my whip out. And then a new armor set. So from this we get the white church set, which is what like the imposter Iosefka wears. And it might be related to what the Yharnamites in this area were wearing as well. So as you can see, like most of the descriptions are similar. The hat is a bit different from the other parts. And this set is supposed to share the surgical long gloves in common. So that's why we now have two copies of it. So looking at the white church hat, it says attire of special church doctors. These doctors are superiors to the black preventative hunters and specialists in experimentally backed blood ministration and the scourge of the beast. They believe that medicine is not a means of treatment, but rather a method for research, and that some knowledge can only be obtained by exposing oneself to sickness. Actually, it looks like their descriptions are exactly the same. It's just that it's on a new line. Okay, so let me just double check the Japanese on that. I think it was pretty similar, but So yeah, there is a little bit of a flavor difference, and then it just says it doesn't think that, or to them, medicine isn't the work of medical care; it is a means of inquiry. So overall, it's really similar. Just yeah, I guess it's really not that big a deal at all. Trying to decide where to go. So there is this like little lever here which can open the gate right next to us. And we do get some more blue elixirs, which just could further tie in the idea that whatever's going on in the little hamlet here is probably related to research and forbidden experiments of the Healing Church. So this kind of gate is really kind of pointless because you can just walk around the building and a lot of people won't even realize that that's probably like the more direct route into the way just because like the dogs will naturally like draw people towards this direction. So maybe it was this house that has the NPC. Okay, yeah, there's the little light. So I think right now it'll be Patches. And watch me be wrong again.
Oh, a hunter of beasts, are you? Glory be. You know not the value you possess. But more's the pity. The hours of the night are many, and the beasts more than I can count. A veritable hunt unending. Not even death offers solace, and the blood imbibes you. A most frightful fate. Oh my. But I'm willing to do you a kindness. Step lightly round to the right of the great cathedral and seek an ancient, shrouded church. The gift of the Godhead will grant you strength. Yes, I'm unquestionably certain.
So this suspicious figure is none other than Patches, and he gives us the tonsil stone. He can appear in like any NPC window in the game. I maybe not the ones over in Cathedral Ward. I don't think I've really seen him over there now that I think about it. But the last lore through that we did, I visited Gilbert first, and he replaced Gilbert and literally every other NPC in Central Yharnam, which was kind of interesting because I talked to Patches in Gilbert's window, then I talked to him in one of the residences, and then I talked to him in another residence right after that. So it's a little bit wonky how he works. So it does bring into question whether or not like talking to Patches in this form is more like a figment of our imagination or like something more related to insight. And if we do come back and reload the area, Patches won't be here anymore, and we should be able to listen to the NPC's dialogue here. So we got that tonsil stone. So let's go ahead and examine it. Or yeah, I'll examine it and then talk about Patches' dialogue in a minute. So this is a lattice deformed rock, or perhaps a meteorite. Appears useless, but possesses some odd gravitational force that prevents its riddance. A dubious soul once said, "Step lightly round to the right of the great cathedral, and seek an ancient shrouded church. The gift of the Godhead will grant you strength." So that last paragraph is directly quoted from Patches. I do think this might have been done, like translated a bit early in the development, just because it doesn't call it the Grand Cathedral, which is what like the Lantern Fort calls it. So I think that's just a little bit of a oversight on the consistency of the localization team. Let me pull up that item. A note about the tonsil stone. That's pretty much essentially what that name is in Japanese. And the name for amygdala in Japanese is amendozu, which is probably like taken from almond. And the name for the amygdala in English is taken from Latin, and it means uh, it's part of the brain that's almond shaped. So that's kind of where it gets its name from. So you could pretty much connect the idea of tonsil stones to the shape of almonds and the amygdala. So I think the naming behind the tonsil stone is supposed to show that kind of connection to an amygdala. So, hello, Metal Doji. You ask, do you think Patches was a member of the church? I do believe that Patches is a member of the Healing Church, and probably more likely a member of the School of Mensis at some point, because he does have that kind of a spider body that we can find in the Nightmare Apostles in the part of the Nightmare of Mensis where we go to uh, like knock the brain down. So I do think it's very likely that he's a member of the Healing Church. Although at this point in the game, he might have like renounced his ties to it, or probably not anything like official like that. He's probably just like acting in his very peculiar Patches style of way. If you did want to say, well, maybe he's really not part of the Healing Church because Patches hates clerics and the Dark Souls games, I could also go with that kind of interpretation as well. So there's nothing really concrete, but I do think it is likely that he was affiliated with them to some degree. So going back to Patches' dialogue, he says a few things that are slightly different. I think the localizers did a pretty good job at making his language sound mysterious, but I think they might have gone a little bit overboard with that. So like when he says not even death offers solace and the blood imbibes you, that's definitely very flowery language, whereas he speaks a bit more plainly in Japanese. He'll say like, in the end, you two might end up rotting in death or drowning in blood. So it's just a little bit more straightforward. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is he says that the gift of the Godhead will grant you strength. And in Japanese, that term that they use for Godhead is taken from Shinpi, which is the same thing as that arcane stat, which I've mentioned before. It doesn't really translate or flow very naturally in English, but it's more like he's saying whatever is near the Grand Cathedral is of the arcane, and it will aid us and by becoming like power for us on the hunt, essentially. So that's a little bit hard to get across. So I just do think that the localizers didn't notice that the word Shinpi was used very um intentionally on the part of the Japanese developers, and just something they unfortunately overlooked throughout the game.
Not even death offers solace, and the blood imbibes you. Seek you the ancient shrouded church, hidden to the right of the main cathedral. The gift of the Godhead will grant you strength.
So that's it for his dialogue. And with that out of the way, we're gonna try to. I've got like 40,000 echoes. All right, so I'm gonna go back to the what's it called, the Hunter's Dream, and level up, and then deal with the stupid poisonous cavern underneath Iosefka's clinic. Because it's kind of easy to die there if I'm gonna like try to look at all the items and deal with the little maggots rather than just running through. And then this might also give us the opportunity to talk to the NPC that normally haunts that house. Ooh, if the doll's not there, maybe we'll get lucky. Although I think it only happens after Ram. Yeah.
Welcome home. What is... Very well, let... Farewell.
Okay, I meant to look at my gems. They should be pretty much the same. No, I've looked at that one before. Okay. So I think after going through Iosefka's clinic, I'll talk to Gilbert that way rather than just like wasting a warp and a load screen for it. And I'll just go ahead and run past the normal enemies to get back to where we were. So I think maybe like opening or closing the gate is what triggers the dogs to get released from their kennels. Alright, so that should be it for now. Let's see if the normal woman will be there.
Oh, heavens, would you stop that? Every peep you make brings us bad luck. I have it bad enough already. Please, just leave a poor old woman be.
So there is a bit of a difference in that Japanese like subtitles for her. She will say instead of like every peep you make brings us bad luck, it's more like making us hear that ominous voice. And so that ominous voice could be a reference to the cries of Murgo. That would be like my most educated guess as to what she's talking about. And when we do have those 60 points of insight, we will be able to hear the baby's cries wherever we are in the game. So I think that might be what she's alluding to there. So with that out of the way, we are entering like the caverns beneath the Forbidden Woods and beneath Iosefka's clinic. As we enter, we will see new kinds of plant life emerge. We've got what looks to be tomb mold and the kinds of flowers that we can find which inhabit the hunter's dream. So it seems like this place is supposed to be affiliated with death. Interesting. Which makes a lot of sense because as we look at the ground, we can see that it's littered with bones and that sort of thing. And so one reason why I am pretty confident that like these things are tomb mold is because they resemble the tomb mold item icons, and they're all throughout. We can find like these kind of models all a lot of tomb mold to enter the Eye Chalice dungeons as well. So one thing that I would like to point out about those is it almost seems as though there's like this kind of like fur or hair growing out of the top of the tomb mold itself. And so if tomb mold grows off of cold blood, and cold blood could be related to the blood that people take and causes them to transform into beasts, it almost seems as though those effects aren't uh, discluded from affecting flowers and things like that. And that might also tie into how kin seem to be attracted to flowers, and we'll talk more about that later when we get some of the like the what are they called, the Phantasm items, and when we get into the DLC and like look at the Milkweed rune. So we get some more antidotes, which is probably a good reminder for me to go ahead and bring those out, because we're going to be going into a poisonous area very shortly. So this is a more of like a naturally made cave, it seems. Like there isn't like a lot of uniformity to the path that we're going through. But with that being said, once we get down here, we can see like what might be church servants are wandering around. It seems like there's a shackle on that guy's left arm. His right arm is longer for some reason, which does differ quite a bit from the typical Yharnamite's left arm being longer. And then we see some gigantic graves, which probably are supposed to represent graves of great ones, or the Thumerians. And whether or not those are supposed to be two different concepts is a little bit up in the air. And arguments could be made going for both. And before I forget, when we do look at like the little kind of sand in this area, we see that there are like a lot of burnt corpses. And there are a bunch of graves hanging about as well. And these ones here do resemble what we can find in like the Nightmare Frontier, as well as I think it's I don't remember if there really are graves up in the Nightmare Mensis now that I think about it, but this kind of imagery in general does get repeated elsewhere, and we will see more of like the gigantic tombs in the deeper inside the Forbidden Woods when we get closer to Bergenworth. So coming into contact with this water will poison us very quickly. And there will be like a bunch of like insects. Which kind of reinforces that this place is impure. Did I just get hit by another maggot? Yep. I thought there were 3 over here. Yeah, they're really, really annoying to deal with. But there is a really big theme in like the FromSoft games of like maggots and centipedes and bugs being associated with filth. And filth in general is a really big concept in Shintoism, which is like one of the native religions of Japan, and that death is related to dirt and stagnation and impurity, and so creatures which are like that nest in places of filth or dirt and stagnation, things like mosquitoes and centipedes, they are kind of associated by proxy with death and all of that. So this is what we call a hateful maggot. It's kind of hard to show it off, but it almost looks like it's got these kind of like eye markings on its ridges, kind of right where like the reticle is right now. There's like these little dots in between them. I don't necessarily think those are supposed to be eyes or anything like that. It's just kind of some of the imagery which interests me. You will find a very similar enemy to this in like Dark Souls 1, coming out of like the eggs of the kind of worshippers down in Lost Izalith. So that connection is something which extends beyond Bloodborne itself. So coming into this next area, I think there's just something really minor like a blood gem, but let's go ahead and deal with all the little maggots along the way. An Arcade and Blood gemstone. Damn it. So, yeah, I'm glad I went ahead and spent those echoes earlier, because I was afraid something like that would happen. Oh yeah, and of course, I did not mention like Sekiro also uses that kind of motif as well, where the ascetic Buddhist monks on Mount Kongo are filled with these centipedes, which keep them alive, and it's what keeps like Hanbei the Undying alive as well. And so there's like a really big theme of like the karmaic cycle being prolonged by like avoiding death and staying where you are in life, and that extends to Dark Souls as well, and like Gwyn continuing to like link the flame and having like the chosen undead or like the Ashen One continuing to link the flame instead of like letting the world kind of reset and letting the flame go out is kind of emblematic of stagnation of a different sort. And so one of the ways to like kind of progress beyond like your station in life is to let go of the attachment to life, and that's what would allow one to like achieve like a nirvana in Buddhism. And it might seem as though I'm like jumping around topics a bit, just comparing like Shintoism to Buddhism, but the way that really does work out, and I suppose even like that statement is a bit simplistic, but without like going into ridiculous amounts of detail and like really immersing oneself in the culture to get a very deep understanding of it, like that's pretty much probably like one of the more brief ways to kind of state things, but it's not really like contradictory. It's more like complementary in Japan. Like the religions don't compete with each other in that kind of way. So we get a nourishing blood gemstone. And that corpse over there. I don't really want to deal with like all the gigantic servants over there, so we're just gonna skip them for now and probably get some of the other items on our way back. So it is a bit of a question whether or not those gigantic church servants down there are affiliated with the church, or if they're more of like remnants of a Thumerian civilization, or if that's a place where they just kind of like naturally congregate, and that might be where like the church got their supply of them to use in like the cathedral ward and all that kind of thing. It's a mystery essentially. So coming into like the clinic area, we do see a lot more of the corpses. It seems as though they've just been kind of chucking them down here, and that might be one of the reasons why the area down below is filled with poisonous water. I think it's a bit of a crapshoot either way, because there's very obviously like ancient gravestones down there, which shows that the water has probably been polluted for quite some time, and that might ultimately have been like one of the reasons why Old Yharnam was afflicted with ashen blood. So the church itself might not have had to do anything nefarious to kind of cause that situation to come about, and to cause the people of Old Yharnam to use so much of the blood. So this does bring us back out into Iosefka's clinic. So let's go ahead and talk to Gilbert real quick first to see if he has anything different to say. I think we did exhaust his dialogue. And then this is like Central Yharnam at night, which I have not shown off quite yet. So the sun was over that direction before. Now we've got the moon way over there. And so that does kind of match up with the direction of where the Forbidden Words were from the Cathedral Ward. Maybe? Maybe it's supposed to be more this way now that I think about it. So, okay, yeah, that might line up. But the position of the moon really does change later on, and that'll become a lot more obvious. The moon looks a hell of a lot smaller from here, though.
Have I heard of Bergenworth? Afraid I can't say that I have. The locals aren't apt to share any local history. I'm afraid I may not be of help for much longer.
So I think that was the same thing that we talked about last time. We mentioned Bergenworth to Gilbert. Maybe for the first time after having defeated Amelia and looked at that cutscene. I don't fully remember, honestly, so. In either way, Gilbert isn't doing very well for himself. So coming into the back area of the clinic, we go through this like small cemetery, or whatever you want to call it. And then we will find a kind of experimental patient back here, and whether or not it's an experiment of the clinic or something else is unclear. So we get another brain sucker. Let's see, it has like that really grayish looking blood. It was about to do its grab attack on us and reveal one of its phantasms, but kind of interrupted that. There's not too much else going on over here, and so we'll go ahead and climb the rooftops to gain access to the back of the clinic. So this very conveniently comes right up to a window that's just been left open. And once we enter the back portion of Iosefka's clinic, we gain some more ambient insight. And we can do some exploring. If we had sent some of our NPCs to her, they would be chilling here as kind of a blueberry celestial infants. But we have not done that this playthrough. We did that last one. And so we're just going to go ahead and examine perhaps one of the smoking guns that reveals that people were what became, or like rather, the celestial emissaries originally came from people, because when we examine this corpse of one on the operating table in the back room, we can see that it's still a little bit discolored in its pigmentation. It's got more beige coloring. If we look at its left hand, we can clearly see that it belongs to that of a human. And its right one is transformed into that of a celestial emissaries. It will have 6 fingers on this hand, although it's a little bit hard to make out. Celestial emissaries have 7 fingers on their left hand and 6 on the right. Amygdalae only have 6 on each hand, so it does seem to show like the more progressed you become with like kinhood or becoming kin of the cosmos or great ones in general, like the more fingers you have. It's a bit weird, but I think the general idea is like the more it shows that the brain has more cognitive processing ability for like that kind of fine motor control. And the hands for amygdalae in particular are very interesting because they are kind of I don't know, like symmetrical, so it looks like it's both a left and a right hand. So it doesn't really seem to be limited by left or right-handedness. There's probably a better way to phrase that. I just wouldn't know what that would be. So we just did get another tier of the communion rune. We've already looked at one of it, but the basic idea is that communion does seem to have really strong ties to the healing church. This is what we can find on like the front gate to the cathedral ward and on the hunter chief emblem. And communion also seems to be more strongly related to the kin in general, because we will gain like the highest tier of communion rune from the large celestial emissary boss as well.
Ah, moonlit scents. How did you worm your way in here? Very unfortunate. I had such high hopes for you. Well, I won't make any excuses. Would you mind leaving us alone? Things need not change. You'll do the rescuing, and I'll do the saving. But if you refuse to leave... Oh well. I've always wanted to try my hand on a hunter.
So that's Imposter Iosefka. She's not the real Iosefka, and we will find the real one in just a moment. There's a small difference in her dialogue right there, like her final line where she says she always wanted to try her hand on a hunter. The Japanese says she wonders how difficult it would be obtaining a hunter for her experiments. So that's a lot more explicitly stated in the Japanese, and it's just more heavily implied in English. I think they left it that way in English just because it could be inferred on the part of the players. I don't really have too much of an issue with that. There is another difference when she says, "Well, I won't make any excuses. Would you mind leaving us alone?" In Japanese, it's closer to, I thought we could have built up a good relationship, but now that you understand the significance of what you've seen, I wonder if you could go back as you were. You'll save, I'll cure, let's turn everything back to normal. And then she goes on to like, oh, if you don't turn back, then I wonder how hard it'll be to get a hunter for my experiments. So that's a pretty big difference in my opinion. So it's more like you should understand like what the hell I've been doing here. So unless you're like on board with this, like get out or like face the consequences. So it's either we'll both gain something from this, or like one of us will lose something. So now that we've come back into the front part of the clinic, this is the room where we initially woke up in. That was closed after we left it. Coming to this table in the back, we can gain a very interesting item, the Canner Summons, which I'll examine in just a moment. And then we've got this figure of a celestial emissary, just kind of spaced out over here. If you do look at its left hand right there, you can count that it does have 7 fingers, like I'd mentioned before. And its right does only have 6. If you do look closely at its face, I do think there is a kind of like resemblance to that of a brain sucker. It's kind of got like the sunken in eyes. It does seem to have some form of eyes, whereas like the brain suckers seem to be like completely missing. And it almost looks like the tentacle parts where the brain sucker's face would be, like it's just kind of like lacking those. So they might be a similar type of organism, but they do differ quite a bit. These don't really seem to have like the same kind of phantasm that would just pop out of the brain sucker's head. And the reason why this like celestial emissary might be like in a bit of a daze could be because they might have been experimented on, like using the blue elixirs, and so that might have like put them their minds in a bit of a numbed state, so they could be very heavily sedated. And now that we've brutally killed this somewhat docile blueberry, we can loot its corpse to discover that it has a vial of Iosefka's blood, which should pretty much reveal that this was the real Iosefka that we just murdered. And whether or not that's a mercy killing or something done in cold blood is a bit up for the player to determine. And that pretty much concludes this area of the game. We'll go ahead and go back down to the little cavern beneath. So we could go ahead and attack that imposter Iosefka now. If we did do that, she would drop the Erden Wraith rune, which I think should indicate that whatever happened to her was probably the result of an Eldritch liaison with the Formless Great One Erden, in a similar fashion to what might happen with the Woman of the Night Ariana and her production of the kind of celestial emissary or celestial larvae baby, and the production of her third umbilical cord. So I do think there is that kind of thematic link between both women. So we're back in the caverns now, and this is like a kind of alternate way to approach the clinic. It just loops a bit. Why did I do that? some more frenzied cold blood. There'll be a bunch more maggots over there. And so the church servants here do still have like the bells around their necks. And that one we get a dirty gemstone. And I haven't really looked at these gemstones because most of them just kind of repeat what they say. So I'll just go ahead and look at them now. So yeah, it's pretty much the exact same thing as everything else that we've looked at already. Which is part of the reason why I don't stop to look at the blood gems very often, except for the more unique variants. That's rid of that. Right, so now we are back in the Forbidden Woods to where we were before that little detour. So coming back behind this house, we will find a Snatcher. It does not appear here without the blood-starved beast being killed. So this might have been part of the intention for the developers to introduce a player to Yahar'gul if they missed all the other Snatchers in Cathedral Ward. Otherwise, there doesn't really seem to be like a really good reason for its placement here. It does seem really far out of the way, and you really have to kind of scratch your head to wonder why it would be here if like this is kind of a forbidden area. You wouldn't expect it to get a lot of the residents of Yharnam for the Ritual of Mensis in Yahar'gul in this location. Although it might have been kidnapping residents of this like little hamlet, and that might be why there's so many of them in the Hypogean jail right before the fight with Parl. So that corpse right there drops a very, very interesting item. It's the Beast Roar. It's a hunter tool. And this is one of the forbidden hunter tools made by Irreverent Izzy. Borrow the strength of the terrible undead dark beasts, if only for a moment, to blast surrounding foes back with the force of a roaring beast. The indescribable sound is broadcast with the caster's own vocal cords, which begs the question, what terrible things lurk deep within the frames of men? So this is one of my favorite items in the game. In terms of mechanics and lore, there's a small like difference in the Japanese. It's supposed to be a bit clearer that the function of it will also like blast away projectiles. But let me go ahead and pull up that description. So it says it's a catalyst that borrows the power of abominable undying black beasts for an incredibly short time. Blow away things in your surroundings with the built-up pressure of a beast's roar. The scream is shattering, yet it comes from the vocal cords of the user. What could possibly be lurking within men? So yeah, it isn't just necessarily limited to foes that it will blast away. And so the final dialogue there, or the lines there, which talks about what lurks deep within the frames of men, I think is very interesting because this should clearly show us that like beasthood is something endemic to humans, and it lurks within men. And so even though like the blood does bring it about, it doesn't seem to be like the sole cause. And one thing that this does make me wonder is, since like the Thumerians are described as being inhuman, as well as like some of the people of Cainhurst, maybe one of the reasons why they don't seem to transform into beasts or like more scourge beasts or more werewolf-like enemies in particular, maybe because they aren't quite humanoid in the truest sense of the word. Although that does get a bit questionable, just like whether or not humans are human in Bloodborne, or how they really differ from the Thumerians, biologically speaking. So that is just something that I have thought about, because you will not find Scourge beasts within the Thumerian chalices at all. There will be like a beast possessed soul as like a boss enemy in the story ones, but that's really it. You don't find examples of beasthood there whatsoever. So that item has been picked up. I'm surprised that hit me from this distance. So this is the little oil-filled pool of water that we first looked at a while ago. This corpse right here drops a lot more Molotov cocktails for us to very conveniently use against those aforementioned corpses. I thought he would have heard me running up behind him, but I will take it. And this will open up that shortcut, which I talked about, leading back into that little hamlet from earlier. So this leads back to the scaffolding over around that building right there. What am I doing? So that should be it from that little spot right there. And then coming into the next area, we've got a bunch of like houses lining this kind of a pretty shabby avenue, for lack of a better term. And there's a cannon at the end of it, which will fire at us and can one-shot us, especially in the foreign garb. Last time I did get shot by the cannon as I was coming really close to it, which is pretty funny. But I'm not looking to repeat that this time. So you can get a bit of cover from like the buildings here, although that's not what I was trying to show off. And it can end up like hitting its allies as well. So Rubito, welcome back to the streams. It's nice to see you again. Hopefully I don't embarrass myself right here. So this cannon was being operated by Yharnamite. You can operate it for yourself. Very fun to do, although its range seems to suck. You can't really like change the azimuth of it at all, which is a little bit annoying. But you can make like a little bit of a makeshift trap by like placing a bunch of shining coins at where it will where it'll land, and then potentially like tricking a someone in an invaded world into thinking there's like a piece of loot that they can pick up. Oh wow. So I deal with the cannon and just get comboed to death by this guy. It's annoying. So Rubito asks, is this settlement a part of Yharnam or a place for outcasts or what? Looks like a farm, you guess. This is a kind of an unmarked place, really. It's a it seems to be like a kind of a research ground for the Healing Church, potentially to fiddle with like beast blood pellets or a beasthood in general. We will, as we go through that village, we gained a lot of the beast blood pellets, which talk about the Healing Church banning them. We find some blue elixirs on some corpses, which are used for experiments conducted by the high ministers of the Healing Church. So, considering that like the Forbidden Woods is a kind of forbidden taboo area to begin with, it is very interesting that you find so many like forbidden taboo items in here as well. So it seems as though like the Healing Church as an organization is more like do as I say, not as I do, which is pretty in line with the whole like kind of corruption that you expect to find in FromSoft games, and the very kind of pessimistic view that they have on things like this. I seriously thought the dog was about to kill me. It's the growing pains of a foreign garb run for sure. So fortunately we did just open up that shortcut right here. So yeah, while this place is a lot more agrarian compared to the rest of Yharnam, it seems to be like primarily a place for like research at this point or experimentation done in the shadows. And possibly like one of the motivators for that could have been that the entrances to the physical locations of the Chalice dungeons might have been near this place as well, which could have influenced why the experiments were done in this locale as opposed to others. So let's try to do a bit better this time. We go Tecmo Super Bowl zigzag right there. So Herbert West, welcome back to the stream. You said you like to think that this is where they were chased off to after Old Yharnam, since you find a lot of beast blood pellets in Old Yharnam but nowhere else in the city. That's a pretty interesting thought. How do you reconcile that with the idea of like the password gatekeeper keeping people out? Like I know that's not like the best argument to make because you do find like that the snatcher here as well. So I just want to hear your take on that. If you don't mind. Blood vial and the beast blood pellets. So like in this area we've already found like way more than 10 beast blood pellets. So it does seem to be really exaggerated just like how much like taboo stuff is found in this area, which doesn't make sense if like the Healing Church truly did not approve of the usage of the beast blood pellets. So now we are starting to enter like the windmills. I didn't show it off, but this most certainly is a windmill, but a different one than the one we first came to. Coming through here. So you said there are a few ways to take it, but I don't think the text advances your any one interpretation for how they get in and out or whether they do or not. That's a fair point. Like, it also wouldn't explain why there's so many people affiliated with the Healing Church in this kind of a location if the password gatekeeper kept them out. Although maybe they knew the passwords, but maybe not. So this guy right here is a snake-filled parasite hunter. Its movements aren't quite natural. It's like dragging the axe along on the ground. Its head is covered with like bandages and things like that. It does stop and like kind of stare at that corpse, so you can just kind of come up for it and get a free visceral. It does make me wonder if like there is some still latent humanity within these folks, or whether or not like the corpse in front of it was related to this particular individual, or it could just be for no reason at all, and we're just looking into things too deeply. So we get some more man's knowledge from there. The way this through there is a kind of shortcut which we haven't accessed yet. And then this, or do I always get turned around? Yeah, so I just had that backwards. This is the shortcut we haven't gotten access to. And then this is kind of the way forward. I'm going to go ahead and try to open up the windmill first before dealing with the suspicious beggar and all that. So that dude just is like one of the snake parasite guys that I was talking about. He just kind of shot a bunch of snakes out from its arm. And we've got a better gemstone than we've gotten so far from its corpse. And then all along that bridge, we do find like a whole bunch of scarecrows again. But I'll look at that when we come back down. So coming inside the windmill, we've got a corpse with some more antidotes, which aren't too much use to us at this point. And then we can find another friendly NPC that was added with the DLC. Volter, the Master of the League. And looking at Volter, he's wearing like the Constable set. I've pointed this out in the previous lore through, but like that little camera looking like thing down there is more like an correctly. He's got like a whistle, so that way if he was part of a group, they could signal each other and like get reinforcement if they were separated, or if they were like chasing a suspect and showing them the way. So let's hear what he has to say.
Ah, a new face, are you? And an accomplished hunter, it would appear. I am Volter, Master of the League. Members of the League cleanse the streets of all the filth that's spread about during the hunt. Like any half-decent hunter ought to, you know? Haven't you seen enough of these wretched beasts? Freakish slugs and mad doctors. Sentence these fiends to death with the help of your League confederates. What do you say? Why not join the League?
So this will be our first access to a kind of covenant within Bloodborne. There are no penalties for joining multiple covenants or like trying to abandon them. You can't really do it, so there's no real reason to not join them, so we're just going to go ahead. Actually, I'll go ahead and refuse just because we can just talk to him later and join in a moment.
Yes, I suppose I should not force your will. But you are a hunter, and we'll see soon enough that on a night of the hunt, no, on any night, nothing out there deserves to live.
So he very definitely has a kind of a fatalistic view on the hunt and the kind of things that you encounter out there. As far as his dialogue goes, for the most part, it's pretty similar. he does say that the beasts are impure in Japanese, and that might relate to the idea of like the Canehurst variety of impurity, although it's probably more along the lines of like just being impure in general is something closer to beasthood and something close or something like a um, tied to the blood.
Well then, you've seen enough out there. You fancy joining the ranks of the League? Yes, as a hunter well should. Commit this to heart. Our own Carol rune, symbol of the League.
So from Valter we gain the Impurity rune, and I'll have a ton to say about that in just a moment.
The night brims with defiled scum and is permeated by their rotten stench. Just think, now you're all set to hunt and kill to your heart's content. Hunt in cooperation with your fellows, your League confederates.
So intense might be like the only way to describe Valter's dialogue there. I do think there's a lot of similarities between like Valter and Father Gascoigne, and so their kind of differences do interest me because Father Gascoigne was certainly like blood drunk and seemed engrossed in hunting. Valter seems to be so as well. However, Valter doesn't transform into a beast, and Gascoigne does. I'm not entirely sure exactly why that has transpired in the way that it has. One idea that I have in relation to that could be because Valter has fully embraced the hunt, whereas Gascoigne did seem to kind of try to hold on to parts of his humanity, and that might have been a bit more on display when we use like the music blocks. He'll grab his head, probably becoming filled with the memories of his family and potentially like the shock of having killed his own wife coming back into his mind. And Valter doesn't seem to be drunk with blood so much, and he is more or less called the Beast Eater, so it might be that his kind of bloodlust transcends the hunt because he eats essentially like the most taboo thing that you could because if you think that like beasts are transformed from people, it's no less than an act of cannibal to eat a beast at this point in the game in the world. So while beasts might not essentially be people, they do come from people, but even worse, like diseased people. So it's probably like one of the most corrupt acts you could really do as a human. It's like the full-on embrace of impurity. I don't want to say too much more to just kind of like evoke that imagery, but there there's certainly like a lot more to be said about them. So Herbert says you had to go AFK for a bit, and you'd guess the Iosefka's clinic passage is how they got in and out anyway. If a passage is required to make sense of it, and you're not sure it is, you know that's a pretty fair point. So thanks for bringing it up. So what was I saying with Walter? I think that's pretty much it for his dialogue at this point. So let's go back to the impurity rune before finishing off what he has to say. So this is the Impurity Rune, a Kara rune that transcribes inhuman sounds. This rune, discovered inside the Forbidden Beast Eater, came to symbolize impurity and the Oath of the League. Confederates of the League cooperate with hunters from other worlds and hunt to discover vermin. Vermin writhe within filth and are the root of man's impurity. Crush all vermin without hesitation. So this topic might become a bit confusing to any of those who are not familiar with the kind of thing that I'm about to talk about. I know I've got some like regulars here, and I do appreciate them for coming in. So just bear with me here for while I go over it again. Rubito says that this rune looks like the algaes minus the dots. With the dots, it looks like a body or a chalice dripping blood. Yeah, and it does resemble the Hunter's rune as well, which is definitely reminiscent of the algaes or like the kind of life rune. I think in like Norse mythology it is. So going back to the text itself, the impurity rune in Japanese is more close to the idea of stagnation instead. One could also make the argument that it should be that it could be read as like the dreg rune, and that gets a bit confusing when we look at like the blood dreg item In the Japanese version of the game, like blood dregs are called the impurities of blood, and the Canehurst rune is called the impurity rune. So this rune should be known as like the stagnation or the dreg rune, is something that I would argue. And I'll just go ahead and read the text and then talk about the differences for the Japanese version. It says, there are a few Carol runes given the meaning of blood, and impurity was one of them. It particularly holds the meaning of a contract. Those contracted to it. Oh, wait, I'm looking at Canehurst one, so forgive me for that. So this is a stagnation rune. One of the Carol runes of the phonetic representation of an inhuman voice. It is said to have been discovered from the inside of a forbidden beast eater, given the meaning of stagnation, and became the oath of the League. Those contracted to it cooperate with hunters from other worlds and discover insects in successful hunts. Wriggling and hiding in filth, they are the source of human dregs. Without hesitating, they are to be crushed underfoot. So overall, it is very similar. So most of what I have to say is more tied to like cultural concepts rather than just literal linguistic ones. So this idea where I talk about they're the source of human dregs is a bit of a I don't want to say it's like a contentious point, but the reason why I've translated it as human dregs in this context is because of the item that we can find in Dark Souls 3. It's called the human dregs. Uh, in Japanese, it's Hito no Yodomi no Kongen, or sorry, that's like the full phrase, but Hito no Yodomi is like the stagnation of man, a bit literally. And you could take that as being human dregs because in a stagnant pool of water, like the impurities that reach down to the bottom creates a bit of sediment, and that's kind of I think it's talking about. So it's the source of like a kind of a sedimentation within men or impurity, and that's what allows like the vermin to kind of take root within man and manifest themselves, and potentially might be tied to what we find with like the headless bloodletting beast and like the kinds of hateful maggots that we just found in that cavern next to all those kind of church servants as well. So this idea of becoming a stagnant environment allows like vermins and things associated with filth to have a kind of nesting ground to breed and come into contact with this world. And this does have like a lot of parallels with the idea of fluids and water in general, and like the sea and the lake rune, and about like how to reach the arcane, one must go beyond just like the surface of water, which separates dimensions. So I think that's about it for now, and we can just go back to Walter's dialogue.
Now, there is one thing you must know. By the oath of the League, those who bear its rune will see vermin. Vermin writhe deep within all filth and are the root of man's impurity. All vermin are to be crushed. The League exists to expunge all vermin, ridding us of any trace of human corruption. And so, until we are rid of all vermin, you must continue to hunt and kill. This bloody fate is ours alone. Do not expect the world to grasp our work. But remember, the Confederates will always have my blessing, and each other. Always.
And so what Walter talks about right there does tie into what I was mentioning a bit earlier about the uh, the dregs of man being related to the human corruption and what was it? The root of man's impurity. So in Japanese, he says like it's the final mission of the League to go ahead and crush all vermin, which seems a bit of a kind of unending mission, which does get repeated a couple times. That like the League will always have an unending mission.
All vermin, ridding us of any trace, and so, until we are rid of all vermin, you must continue to hunt and kill. This bloody fate is ours alone. Do not expect the world to grasp our work. But remember, the Confederates will always have my blessing, and each other. Always.
And so Herbert says, Walter's so cool, he reminds you of Mandus from A Machine for Pigs, kinda. Is that a movie? I don't think I've ever heard of that, actually. And then going back to Walter's dialogue, he talks about how, what was it? The League exists to expunge all vermin, ridding us of any trace of human corruption, and so until we are rid of all vermin, you must continue to hunt and kill. And I do wonder if that does tie into one of his earlier bits of dialogue where he talks about the night brims the night brims with defiled scum and is permeated by the rotten stench. In Japanese, that line is more close to now the night is filled, covered, and overflowing in filth. Isn't it wonderful? So it almost seems as though Walter can't distinguish like filth from like the world itself, and that does make me wonder whether part of the reason why he's no longer able to see vermin is because he sees everything as vermin or covered in filth. So that kind of like their whole deal really does kind of interest me, and it doesn't make like a ton of sense. It would seem like at a surface level glance, because vermin can only be seen by the League. It does make it a bit questionable as to whether they exist, because normal people won't see them, which is why they won't understand the League's mission, and so that's partially why Walter will always support his League Confederates. But as we've seen before, just like in Bloodborne, it isn't necessarily like how do you want to say it? You don't necessarily have to believe something for it to be there, and of course that's certainly true for real life. But like if you don't have the proper insight at some points, like you can't even begin to interact with some things. Like you won't continue to take fire damage from the scythe-wielding church servants in the cathedral ward until you have 15 points of insight. So is vermin something that they create within their own minds, or is it actually something substantial and really worth worrying about? Is
Welcome
something I
home,
wonder.
good. What is it? Very well. Farewell, good hunter.
So it's the Amnesia sequel. Oh, it's a horror game. Yeah, I haven't heard about it. What system is it for? And is it any good? Rubido says, the fact that the description of the vermin item claims they are the source of human corruption makes me think that they must be, but I don't like the implication. Oh, thank you. That reminds me, and I'll talk about that when we can look at the rune again. Herbert says, you don't think you'd like it because it's a walking sim, but it's very well written. Reminds you of the Bloodborne in some ways. Actually, a few of the set pieces are similar. I'll try to look that up later on. So yeah, going back to the idea of the impurity rune itself, it says that vermin within filth are the root of man's impurity. So that does bring in like a lot of questions. It would almost seem as though they should exist without others like being aware of them or not. And so this idea of stagnation might become like a necessary component in terms of like a transformation to some degree, because when you get into the research hall, the patients there are kind of filled with water, and in that kind of a stagnant state, it allows them to begin to overflow. And that idea of overflowing from like a state of stagnation might be kind of similar to this. I always forget the name of the lake in Africa, but one way that I like to think about it is there was this lake in Africa that was left in such a stagnant state for a long time that a pocket of methane gas was stuck at the bottom of it for a really, really long time. And it's theorized like a landslide must have happened and caused the surface of the water to get disturbed to such an extent that it allowed the methane gas to escape, and it killed something like, I think it was like either 5 or 50,000 people, in the neighboring like villages and like all of the livestock nearby. And so that's kind of the way that I mentally picture this idea of stagnation tying into um, transformation and beasthood in general. Like it seems to be like a very abrupt kind of thing once it reaches that kind of like tipping point. And so that might be related, but of course that is just kind of my personal interpretation of things. Rubito says, Soulsborne tends to say just humans are inherently corrupt, not corrupt because of external forces. So vermin actually being the root of man's impurity is weird. That's why I do equate it to that idea of stagnation. It might allow men to be put into a state where something like deep within them can bubble up to the surface and become something horrible. And I do think that that idea gets tied to like the deep in Dark Souls 3, and I think that's exactly the same concept because that's where like the term like Hito no Yodomi is used between both games, and they have like a very similar kind of feel, although kind of a different execution between them. Herbert says, you think it's kind of like an embodiment of man's darkness in the same way the pus of man is? Yeah, exactly. And you think Volter and the League are more sensible if you just ignore the literal goings on and think about what it means to have an endless mission, why these people would be so keen on seeing and destroying the man's darkness and things like that. So, yeah, thanks guys for all of your comments. I do enjoy talking about this thing quite a bit. And I do think there's like probably something... It almost just feels like if there's just like one little piece more of information available to us, it'd be a lot easier to just like have it all sink in place, but it's just kind of hard to put everything together at times. There we go. Rito says you're having fun comparing them to the Mound Makers in Dark Souls 3. You should write more about your thoughts about that. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear that. Like, the Mound Makers, I haven't really gone into too much depth exploring myself. Like, I've done like all the quests in Dark Souls 3, but as far as like the lore of that goes, like it's something pretty unfamiliar with, like how it all meshes back in together. Like I know about like the idea of like the vertebrae shackles, but I haven't really looked at those and pieced it all together for myself to get my thoughts on it. And so we did just come back up that windmill to go talk to that NPC I was talking about trying to see earlier. And before I forget, when we do come this way, we can see... Is it here? Where is it? Oh, it's over there. We can see the College of Bergenworth off in the distance. And when we go to Bergenworth itself, the Moonside Lake... I thought it wouldn't have aggro on me. The Moonside Lake is over there, and we will find the moon right over it. But obviously from this angle there is no moon over there at all. It's still found over like Yharnam from this location, and so there is a bit of a either developer oversight or some potential lore reason for that, which is a little bit hard to explain and I haven't fully gotten down to other than just putting it up to developer oversight really. Herbert says, for instance, you could say something like endless desire to harvest the crust from the world is impure, and people see their own impurity in regular people in the form of bugs for the League. Oh, yeah, like kind of projecting that again. So you're not saying that's definitely the answer, but you can get some kind of coherent thought out of that. Because the literal details are such a mess, maybe those kinds of interpretations are favored. Yeah, I probably want to think a bit more about the potential of like projecting that kind of a inner impurity out in the world. because it's certainly a thing, but it does interest me, like how similar Gascoigne and Valter are, yet how different they also are. It seems like one of the ways in Bloodborne to kind of like avoid like the most horrible things from happening is to just fully embrace. Oh, I did get that visceral off. Is to like fully embrace them, which is a bit counterintuitive to what one might expect. And if you would elaborate on your thoughts more about that as well, I'm certainly eager to read them. I know I might be just misconstruing them a little bit, just from my perspective right now. So yeah, looking down over at Bergenworth, we see the gigantic lake behind it, mountains, no sign of the moon whatsoever. But when we do go back towards Yharnam, the first portion of the Forbidden Woods, we can see that the moon is still that direction. So I think this time I'll send the suspicious beggar to Iosefka's clinic. I don't really want to do that, but I also don't want him to accidentally kill Adela before we finish her quest line. So we get some poison knives, which could help us deal with this bastard along the way. But we're not going to go ahead and do that this time. So coming up to this suspicious beggar, who is very easily missable, and like once you come to this area after the blood moon, he'll disappear permanently. So it's a very missable NPC. You can see that he's crouched over 3 bodies, and he's literally eating the corpse of a child. I would like to think that the reason why these things are kind of in a bit of a more mummified state than something fresh is probably just to kind of deal with the sensors, and that's pretty much it. Talk about being caught literally red-handed, just like Adela after she killed Ariana. I really do like his dialogue here, and like the first kind of like grunt he gives almost sounds more like a dog barking, and then like a normal human sounding surprised.
Whoa! Blimey, don't scare me like that. On a night like this, I took you for a monster. Oh, thank the stars, you're fairly normal. Was it you who put down that awful beast? Ooh, that thing had me trembling, frozen in my boots. And then you came along. Well, if you're a hunter, then would you know of any safe havens?
So his dialogue is a little bit different. In English, of course, he says, "Put down that awful beast," and you're like, "What beast?" There's like been a ton. That's probably just due to the Japanese being a bit ambiguous as to whether it's one beast or multiple beasts. So I personally think he's just kind of like talking about the beasts in the hamlet nearby, or it could just even just be a lie on his behalf. But the other part that I'd like to mention is, rather than saying, "Would you know of any safe havens?" he says, "Do you know of a place where everyone's evacuated to?" And so the implication there is he's not really looking for a safe place. He's just looking for a place that's filled with people. And so it's more or less to kind of further his agenda of feasting on people. As you can see, he's red-handed, covered in blood, and we literally saw him actively eating from the corpse of that child from earlier.
Oh, yeah, of course not. I should have known. This whole place is falling apart once again. It's the curse of Yharnam.
So that Curse of Yharnam is a very interesting line. It almost makes it sound as though like there's something else going on other than like the Scourge of Beasts or what's going on with the blood. So this time we're just going to send him to the clinic. Last time we revealed him as a beast. If we do another lore through maybe next month on like version 1.0, I'll have him just kill the folks in the chapel itself.
Oh, do you find any nice, cozy places to hole up in?
So we're going to send him to the clinic and show that he will become a blueberry just like everybody else.
Well, I'll be. Thank you. It's about time I made a move. I can't very well stay out on my own. Oh, you're giving me hope. Terribly kind of you. Take this. It's all I can offer us, thanks.
So we get some pungent blood cocktails from him.
Thank you. It's about time I made a move. I can't very well stay out on my own.
And that's it for now. So that's pretty much it for all of the kind of NPCs that we can find throughout the game. And next we'll go ahead and grab the cannon. So this is a large prototype firearms fashioned by the workshop of heretics, the powder kegs. Use of this weapon is equivalent to toting a mounted cannon, complete with its ridiculous weight, staggering kick, and lavish use of quicksilver bullets into battle. Such a monstrosity was doomed from the start, and indeed its development was cut short, yet against impossibly gigantic foes, it might be just the thing. I tend to forget whether it's this dialogue or this canon that's different in the Japanese, or if it's the church canon in the DLC. Oh, there is the difference in the Japanese text. Rather than saying it was developed by the workshop heretics, the powder kegs, it just says it's a large-scale gun prototype created by the Healing Church workshop. So that is a bit different, and that does align with the fact that this is a Healing Church weapon in the storage, if I remember correctly. Other than that, it's pretty similar. And it just says, however, if it were to be used against a hopelessly strong enemy, rather than a gigantic enemy, so the size of the monster doesn't really matter, it's just more like how strong they are. But even still, like, all things considered, like, the cannon really isn't that effective for what you might expect it to do. So with this done, we're kind of going to go to a different area of the Forbidden Woods, and we do get some more of like these scarecrows on this bridge. And this is starting to get us closer to Byrgenwerth and like the kinds of forbidden graves along the way. If we look down there, we can still see that the river from earlier does continue to run through this area. And there are some more lights down there as well. Although I don't really think they match up to anything specific. Or not specific, but not to anything important. So coming up this path, we get another butcher type enemy, and a little bit of an Easter egg of an item. It's pretty easy to miss. So that's about it for this spot up here. I'm just going to go back to the very front just to kind of show off that vantage point. So as we approach this section of the Forbidden Woods, we'll see a bunch of these kind of like smaller snake ball type enemies. And you really only encounter these down here. I don't really even think you find them so much in the Chalice dungeons, maybe like in the Hinder Tombs, or maybe the Roots. I don't remember the Hinder Tombs very well because there's only a few of them. They kind of all blend together, honestly. And as we do enter the Forbidden Woods, we kind of encounter either this kind of fungal pattern, which resembles that of an amygdala, or these kind of statues that have been grown over, although they seem to be made out of the wood as well, which does make me wonder now, like, if this is supposed to be kind of similar to the idea of, like, the petrified people coming out of the ground in the Nightmare of Mensis, or perhaps even like the figures of the people in Yahar'gul. I doubt it, but I'm just gonna go ahead and put it out there for us to consider. And then aside from amygdalae, we will also see like figures of celestial larvae as well. So we get some Madman's Knowledge at the base of a Tomb of a Great One. And one of the reasons why we know this is called the Tomb of the Great One, or a Great One, is because that's what it's called in the artwork book. And that's also how we got the name for the Butcher, even though in the English they call it an Executioner, as opposed to like Butcher or like Dissector. And most of the enemy names, honestly. So one of the ways that I like to try to navigate the Forbidden Woods is to keep the lake over here on my right, and to pick up all the items that are on the outside first. There isn't a ton of noteworthy items here. There will be like one of the lake runes or the sea runes further on, like towards the end. But it's just one way where I can keep my like landmarks in order. And a lot of people do get turned around here. A lot of people kind of hate this area. It doesn't bother me that much. And even though I said I'll keep the lake on my right, generally I'm just going to go this way because I know like it doesn't completely loop around fully. And there's like some negligible yet missable items over here. And generally if you do just follow like the lights in the Forbidden Woods, it will guide you to where you need to go, but that's something that a lot of people don't pick up on. Part of the reason why I know that is like true for sure is I did read one of the interviews where like Yamagiwa, one of the producers of Bloodborne, like mentioned that like in some of their early like playtesting, a lot of the players were confused of where to go, so they added extra lights. He didn't say it was Forbidden Woods specifically, but I could hardly think of any more of a place that could use extra guidance than the Forbidden Woods. The only lights that I really remember that could guide people would just be to show that NPCs are in like buildings and are able to be interacted with. So that log does help me remember that like this is where the two sections kind of split. And so we can get back up to the lake and then get some more of the items. This almost looks like a summon sign. It's kind of funny. And that's not normally there. It's from just dealing with enemies. Some twins. And then we get a gigantic snake ball over there. Probably shouldn't run away. I should just deal with him with the cane. So the sea rune should be like right behind this big old tomb over here, if I remember correctly. Yep, the clear deep sea. We have not gotten one of these yet, and it will be similar to the lake rune. You can see like the very last line is the same, and even like the second to last paragraph is shared a bit with this one as well. So this is a secret symbol left by Carol, runesmith of Bergenworth. This transcription of the Great Ones in human voices depicts downreaching currents. This rune means deep sea and grants augmented resistance. Great volumes of water serve as a bulwark guarding sleep and an augur of the Eldritch truth. Overcome this hindrance and seek what is yours. So I think that like final line is a bit played up in English. And I mentioned it was in conjunction with the lake rune, but going back over its general description right quick. For some reason, I'm having some issues with my sheet. Yeah, it's essentially large amounts of water are a barrier protecting sleep. Therefore, water is an augur of the arcane. Ones in search of the arcane must aim beyond it. And I wanted to look at the part where it said about depicting downreaching currents. Okay, it says is given the meaning of deep sea from the way it resembles sinking deeply. So I was wondering just off the top of my head because I didn't remember exactly what the description was, if this idea of like flowing was more related to one of the Shinto concepts of like brushing away impurities. So that does tie into what I was talking about, like stagnation, where it's like when you have a pool of water and the water within it stops flowing, that's what allows the impurities to build. So if you have a pool of like flowing water, it will create an environment in which like the impurities can't sink to the bottom, and so that's what keeps the water pure. That's kind of like one of the beliefs of Shintoism in regards to that. So I was wondering if the sea runes kind of reinforced that, but it's just a little bit different, and I think the English does a good job of what the Japanese is saying there. If we do look at the back of these gigantic tombstones here, the tombs of the Great Ones, it almost looks like there are almost Phantasm-esque like bugs inside it, and like while these are kind of static assets and they don't wiggle around, I think that is what they're supposed to depict. They kind of resemble what we see with like what are they called? The pearl slugs, which we can find in Bergenworth later on. So we will find a bunch more of those kind of tombs in the Forbidden Grave as well as along different sections of this part of the wood. And so for some reason we do have like just more randomly super glowing red lights. Some murky gemstone. So that should be about it for there, so we can just kind of canvas the rest of the area for now. And so we're back on like the main path, and so with the lake to the right of us, we've got that log again as our kind of landmark feature. The gigantic tombstone up there, and it almost looks like there's that kind of a hunter's rune at the top, or is it more just like a maybe not, it's a little bit hard to make out. And these are like the kind of a celestial larvae statues, which we can find in Yahar'gul as well. And they might not even really be celestial larvae, they could just be something similar to the kinds of infant experiments that we can find in Byrgenwerth. Oh, it looks like I forgot an item up there. So there should be another giant snake ball over here. Did I kill it? Maybe. Or is it behind this? I don't remember. So, coming down there, we have a very dangerous pit filled with 2 of the snake balls, and then to our right, we'll have some like 3 of these snake guys, and it's a pretty dangerous spot in general. Especially if you can't parry. So one way I like to deal with this is try to just kite the one away from the other. But that did not work out. Maybe it did. Okay, I think this happened last time too. Damn it. There we go. Gain some more blood vials and one of our first chunks right there, which is very welcome. So when we do come to these snake guys, if I remember correctly, it's either like a sea or a lake rune at the base there next to them. I was hoping to deal more damage, but I guess I'm just gonna have to kite the one over here. And cheese it with the cane if I can. So that's the one. If we do look at these gigantic snake balls, it almost looks like they're covered with ticks, which is pretty terrifying. And none of the snakes really have eyes either. So the deep sea rune, okay. I'm not going to go ahead and read that because it's pretty much exactly the same as the other one. They just have a bit of a different effect, whereas the one will increase frenzy resistance, the other increases slow poison, and then the lake just increases normal damage reduction. So coming up here, we'll get like another shortcut area. There's another snake parasite filled man next to a gate that is closed. And that gate will serve as a shortcut, so we can't go through quite yet. There's another snake ball behind this like little ridge over here. And yep, I thought there's another patrolling guy as well. I did forget to show off this dumbass pig the last lore through, but there are 3 pigs in this area total. This is one of them. So that guy's taken care of. So that's the snake ball that I was talking about. Gonna one first. Yeah, there's 2 of them. Don't want to deal with that right now. The Mercury Gemstone, and there's nothing else over here. It's just where you would drop down if you went to the shortcut area too soon. So with all of this area kind of done, oh no, I didn't want both. Maybe if it's just the one. So that guy which just screeched at us right now is summoning a bunch of the smaller snake balls. I guess he stopped caring. And then once we clear out these little guys and the other parasite dude, I'm going to go ahead and go for that Graveguard set and unlock the other windmill shortcut. There's some more snake balls over here, and they're like over by an item, and it's pretty minor. So Metal Doji says, summoning them from the ground implies there's a bunch of snake balls slithering under the ground. Yeah, I guess I'd never really thought about that implication, but it seems like the entire woods must be infested with these kind of snakes and snake parasites, which would make sense as to why like so many of the Yharnamites seem to be infected by them. So I'm not going to worry about those enemies. They're pretty minor. But I do want to find where the patrolling guy went, just because I don't want to get ambushed later on. So he works on like a kind of a loop. And that's the bottom portion of the Graveguard set. And I know I walked past some snake balls. Okay, here he is. Alright, so we're gonna come up this like little ridge line, and I think it's right around here, or is it beyond the dumb horse? Okay, so this is like a little bit of a jump off point to go and get the mask for the Graveguard set. That leads back to the area which we've already explored, past like those red lights which I pointed out a little bit ago. So in order to get it, you do have to make this kind of jump, and I think I just screwed up, which is not too great. And we are thrust into the area that's filled with like a bunch of the celestial emissaries. You get a madman's knowledge, the arcade blood gemstone, which is a bit of a randomized drop. And so the next ones that we'll come across will have like these kind of tendrils, and they might kill me with one shot if I'm like careless and dodge into an attack. Yeah, screw it. Let's just YOLO it. And they'll have like these tendrils coming out of their heads. And they'll have like arcane attacks as well. Okay, so they seem to be extremely weak to thrust damage, just like the brain suckers. So I'll keep that in mind for future playthroughs as well. Okay, so that was a lot easier than I was making it out to be in my head. And so we do get another Carol rune, the anti-clockwise metamorphosis rune. I don't know why I just did that. Have it. And so one of my favorite runes in the game, or one of my favorite types of them, is they boost stamina, so you don't have to waste a lot of levels to increase it. So this is a secret symbol left by Carol, runesmith of Bergenworth. The twisted cross means metamorphosis. Rotated anti-clockwise, this rune boosts stamina. The discovery of blood made their dream of evolution a reality. Metamorphosis and the excesses and deviation that followed was only the beginning. For you American folk out there, saying anti-clockwise is more just like a kind of British English way of saying counterclockwise. I don't know what you Aussies choose to believe it should be called, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same as anti-clockwise. Looking at the text of it, I think most of it is pretty much spot on. Maybe the last portion is just slightly different in that it says the discovery of blood brought them dreams of evolution. The diseased or perhaps perverse metamorphosis is considered its beginning. So just I suppose like a slight deviation there, but overall I think like the general message can still be understood pretty easily as it is right now. And Australians usually use anti-clockwise. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. I'll store that in my mind for whatever reason. And then we get another madman's knowledge from the corpse here. And then we will come out to like this kind of interesting like pool that's filled with like these kind of glowing fireflies. I think Lance McDonald said that you would originally be able to fight like the snake ball boss here, and that might be why like this has such a distinct look. Because I had been wondering for a long time, like, why do you only see these kinds of fireflies here? I'd wondered if they had any connections to the kinds of celestial emissaries, but it turns out it might have just been like a kind of pseudo boss arena, or maybe even a full-on boss arena when the snake ball was still considered a boss. So those are one of the other two pigs, or three pigs that I talked about from earlier. just gonna try to go and double back to where I fell, and go ahead and round off with getting that grave set item, set, armor set rather. And so there's that ridge with the snake ball behind it originally, and then we should, okay. Just follow the path up till the burning horse and then make a right. So, okay. Alright, there we go. So, Rubido says, you're glad Snakeball was cut, to be honest. Looks like it would have been a tedious as hell to fight. Yeah. I mean, it's a really cool concept. I don't think it really fit very well. I could understand it being cut. I don't know whether it was just due to more mechanical reasons or lore reasons, or it just wasn't working out for their specific needs. I do like the Shadows of Yharnam as a boss fight. It just gets a little bit annoying, like trying to explain the difference between those Shadows of Yharnam and the ones like in the Nightmare of Mensis, and unfortunately, like just not everything can be wrapped up neatly with a bow wrapped around it. So okay, that was the Graveguard set. And there's quite a huge difference, or potential huge difference in this, I should say, because it is ambiguous. So, Rubido says Master Willem fight would have been appropriately comical, though. Souls has always been slightly goofy despite being depressive. Yeah, that's I agree with that. I do think it was probably for the better that they did split up Willem and Mikolash, although I think it also really could have worked out quite well if they were the same, especially like you had an old version of Willem in real life and like his younger version in the dream. Granted, that's not necessarily supported. That's just an idea that I have, so I don't want anyone to go away with like the wrong impression about that. Alright, so looking at the Graveguard set, all of the descriptions are pretty similar. I'll just go ahead and read the mask, and if anybody's super curious about the other lines, they could look it up later. So this is the Mask of Dorez, Graveguard of the Forbidden Woods. His pale countenance mimics the Labyrinth Watchers. Willem kept 2 loyal servants back at Bergenworth. When they were sent into the Labyrinth, they encountered the Eldritch Truth and went mad. One became the password gatekeeper, while Dorez became a Graveguard of the forest. Both remained loyal, even in madness. So the real important thing that I'd like to talk about with this set would be, rather than saying Willem kept 2 loyal servants back at Bergenworth and that they were sent into the labyrinth, there's an ambiguous word in Japanese, shitagao, which could just mean to obey somebody, or it could mean to literally follow or accompany somebody. And so what this could mean, as far as like Willem goes, it could show that Willem was down in the labyrinth with Dorez and the password gatekeeper when they came into contact with the Eldritch Truth. And as I've mentioned time and time again, the Eldritch Truth is synonymous with like the arcane and the kind of like cosmological force of nature within Bloodborne that's associated with the supernatural. And so when we do look at the Eye Rune later, it's said to have come from the voice of the Abandoned Great One, which should be Ebrietis or Ebritis, however you want to pronounce that. And so the way that I like to look at this kind of altering interpretation would be that Willem, Dorez, and the password gatekeeper could have all been down in the chalices. They could have come into contact with Ebritis' voice, which in the form of a Carol rune, and since Carol runes are described as having like arcane power, I think that's where this kind of a connection between encountering the Eldritch Truth and the ability for them to go mad tie together. And that would also help explain why Bergenworth took to developing sedatives, because their kind of tomb prospectors would encounter the Eldritch Truth quite often and go mad, so they did have to kind of come up with a countermeasure to deal with that. And so I think that was everything that I had to say about that. Let me double check. Yeah, okay, so I think that's it. If you guys have any questions about that, go ahead and feel free to ask. And if you have just other questions in general, you're more than welcome to bring those up as well. And so this is like the little river which the pigs will be at. By going towards the back, we can open up the other windmill shortcut. Oh no, my camera! Honestly, I feel like some of my viscerals are just kind of garbage. Like, once you get like really familiar with the game, you just kind of get used to like a little bit of a rhythm. Like, I totally didn't read that guy's attack. You just kind of develop that feel of when you know it's gonna come, which is why I miss a lot of the shots sometimes. I'm just gonna go back and level up now, because it'll be easier to do with most of the area cleared out. And then we'll just go through the pigs and then try to deal with the Shadows of Yharnam, because this will also restore my bullets. So 52,000's maybe enough to level me up like 3 times at this point. So everybody says you're going to sign off because you have classes tomorrow and it's 4 a.m. Holy crap. See you, Protag. Happy streaming. Thanks again for stopping by and participating in chat, as always. Herbert says you're going to read the A Machine for Pigs wiki. See you later. Okay. Thanks for stopping by, Herbert. It's always a pleasure having you around as well. Have a good night. Or a good day in Australia.
Welcome. What? Very well. Farewell.
So, it seems like it's a pretty decent increase in the DPS just from the gems so far, so always nice. And then I'm going to go ahead and equip that Impurity Rune. Maybe I should summon Yamamura since I remember to do that this time. The shadows aren't too bad. I did really well the last lore through against them, and that should be good enough. I don't think I'll do nearly as well as I did the last time on the Shadows of Yharnam. I got pretty lucky with that RNG. I'm not necessarily afraid that I'll die to them, but it's always a possibility. So I think off stream I'll go ahead and farm a couple vermin just to complete Volter's quest a bit early on. Oh, why'd I go this way? This was the wrong way. Wait, no it wasn't. I'm just spacing out. If I was smart, I would have sent that other elevator back up, but I guess present me hates future me sometimes. So we'll just have to deal with that if it becomes an issue. Hopefully it won't. So this is one of those pigs, which I had mentioned earlier. I always hate how like wonky their sound effects are. It almost sounds like you're always being surrounded by them, even though it's just the one pig at a time. And so underneath that tree, I think there's like another lake rune. I'll get that after we clear out this other pig, so they don't want to get ambushed later. I was not trying to jump. Oh, well, fire took care of that for me, so it's a pleasant surprise. And then we get some more like the rotted, drowned corpses. And they do kind of like bleed that like greenish muck color. I don't necessarily think like they have different blood by any means. It's just something interesting as far as like the visuals go on the different enemies. So dissipating like. Oh, and we got a sedative. I don't know if I've gotten those yet, so. It'll be nice to read that now that we've looked at just the graveyard set a moment ago. Okay, so no, it was our first. So this is liquid medicine concocted at Bergenworth, calms the nerves. Those who delve into the arcane fall all too easily to madness, and thick human blood serves to calm the frayed nerves of these inquisitive minds. Naturally, this often leads to reliance on blood ministration. So there's a small difference, I think, in the Japanese. I just wanted to double check. I think it was the final line. It says, in the end, it sprouted from connections to blood healing. So that is a bit different. So the way that sedatives were thought up or created was tied to the way that they were using blood administration. I think the description for this is supposed to be a bit straightforward, that it is actual thick human blood, which it comes from. And one of the reasons why I think that's supported is, in addition to being able to clear the frenzy meter on the player, sedatives are able to clear the beasthood meter as well, which is a pretty unknown, or maybe not unknown, but lesser known mechanic of the game. Which so if beasthood is tied to the old blood and all that kind of thing, it would only make sense that sedatives, if it's just regular rich human blood, would be able to kind of cleanse that effect as well. But it wouldn't seem to have the kind of a high of the old blood, which is why people wouldn't be interested in taking it so much. It does make me wonder if it is kind of a numbing effect using like normal human blood at that point. Oops. Just because they're called sedatives, both in English and Japanese. So we can summon the younger Moderus twin here, since we have the League rune on. I think I called him Yamamura earlier because I wasn't thinking about what I was saying. So this is one of the League Confederates. I thought there was another NPC that we can summon for this fight. I tend to not use them, so I don't remember who they are. And then we just did get the other kind of a rune right there, the clockwise metamorphosis. So when you compare it to the anti-clockwise one, it's pretty much the exact same description, although instead of saying clockwise, it says anti-clockwise, and looks like just a little bit of a difference in like the spacing on the lines. Like the description's pretty much exactly the same beyond that. Henrik. Okay, thank you, Saturn. Oh, I haven't defeated Henrik, so we won't be able to see him this playthrough because we'll be fighting Eileen in the Grand Cathedral this time. So thank you, because I was totally banking on just like the other one being right here, like it normally is. But coming into this next little area, we will encounter the Shadows of Yharnam. I don't think there's any specific like items I want to use to like buff myself for it, so we'll just deal with it. There will be 3 of them, and they'll be wielding different weapons. One has like a mace and like a katana. The other has like just a full-on katana, and the other one is just like will breathe fire. Oh, I'm so not used to having a League Confederate there. That's confusing the crap out of me. Well, it seems like the health is a lot larger too. Oh no, they killed my guy and probably just made this fight harder. So I like to use the big grave to kind of separate them when I can. So that was some pretty loud lightning. So if I lose my internet connection in the midst of this, I'll apologize in advance. I don't think that'll happen, but I just want to warn everybody. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Alright, so that really wasn't too bad. I tend to worry about these guys because it's always kind of a mixed bag, like, I don't know. It's either a feast or famine fight for me. So after defeating the Shadows of Yharnam, we get the Blood Rapture rune. Maybe I should have shown off like a little bit of them, like summoning the snakes and stuff, but it's just a pain in the ass to deal with, especially with like the foreign garb run. So thank you for the GG. Let's go ahead and read that Blood Rapture rune. So this is a Kara rune that transcribes inhuman sounds. Blood Rapture is the raw euphoria of the warmth of blood. Restores HP with visceral attacks, one of the darker hunter techniques. This rune resonates with servants of the Queen, carrier of the Child of Blood, who yearns for the Queen's blood with little hope of requitement. For them, they find solace in Blood Rapture, that serves as a surrogate for their desires. There is a bit to say about this. I have mentioned a few times that the idea of Vile Bloods in the English localization is only within the English localization, and that this idea of Cainhurst is more tied to an impure blood clan. One of the reasons why I do like to harp on this point is because Queen Yharnam is described as the Blood Queen of Thurmuru, and Annalise is described as the Blood Queen of Cainhurst, or more like the Impure Blood Queen of Cainhurst, and you wouldn't necessarily understand that they're both supposed to be called a Queen of Blood, and very likely tied together. So I think it's extremely, extremely likely that Cainhurst is descended from Thumuru, and that Annalise is probably a distant relative of Queen Yharnam, and is like the kind of legacy heir of the civilization of Thumuru, essentially. And so this idea of the Blood Rapture potentially being tied to both Thumuru and Cainhurst gets relevance when we see that the Shadows of Yharnam were probably the royal guards of Queen Yharnam, and maybe perhaps like the Bloody Crow of Cainhurst was a royal guard of Queen Annalise, who is tasked with hunting hunters to collect blood drugs for his queen. So that idea is probably similar between both cultures, and probably the way that the first Child of Blood, probably like Murgo or whatever we find within the Yharnam Stone, came to be, because they would probably go out, hunt the impurities in blood and offer it to the queen, and from their queen's blood they would try to seek their reward in a kind of a literal trickle-down economics. Let's look at the actual text of the Blood Rapture in Japanese. I think for the most part it's similar. It's just really like the final paragraph that's a little bit different. Child of Blood, I think in English it implies that carrying in the sense of like being pregnant, whereas the Japanese, at some point in development, it did most certainly have that connotation of like literally being with a child or being pregnant. But at some point along development, it seems like they backed away from that idea, and so they altered it into like literally embracing a child of blood. And so that idea of like embracing a child as opposed to bearing a child will come up in a few more contexts later on, especially once we get to Bergenworth and look at one of the notes there. So Sundry asks, where did the name Yharnam come from? The queen herself? Maybe. When I did look at the Japanese translations for like all the chalices, I think it's the Isle Root Chalice. Let me go ahead and pull that up real quick. It's the Thumeru Isle Root Chalice, yeah. So it says that the king of Thumeru, or more like the ruler of Thumeru, is traditionally female. It is said her ancient name was inherited for generations. So it could be like that Yharnam is essentially the surname or the last name of the people of Thumeru, and maybe even Canehurst. And so it was a name that was inherited for a long time. So I don't know whether it's something more like akin to like calling yourself like Queen Elizabeth or like Pope George the Fourth, something like that. Like I do know like at least for the real life parallels, like kings and queens and popes can like choose their name once they assume like that official capacity as the ruler of their respective organizations, or whether or not this is more like a house type name with Yharnam. So whether or not the Queen Yharnam that we see is the first Queen Yharnam is a bit of speculation. I don't think it would hurt to read it either way, but I personally tend to think it might have been a name that she herself inherited rather than her being the first instance of it. So hopefully that answers your question. And then, as I pointed out before, like the moon had been like towards that way, towards where Yharnam was, and you'd almost expect it to be like towards Bergenworth, like that way. But when we look out there, we don't see the moon to either of those directions. For some reason, it's like behind these graves here, and I don't think that does match up with the location of Yharnam. It's a little bit hard to like prove that, but for whatever reason, within the Forbidden Woods and the Forbidden Graves, the positioning of the moon is not very consistent. So you're welcome, and thank you for the question as well. So we're going into the next area towards Bergenworth, and we'll probably just like look at the notes here before like doing too much. Maybe like save Rom for the next stream and not do the side areas first this time. So this spooky enemy right here is a Garden of Eyes. In the internal file names, it's called like the Cthulhu Spider. I don't really think there's a real like reason behind calling it a Cthulhu Spider, other than just like a way for the devs to remember what they were. It's caught on the wall right now, so I can't really show it off, but in its left hand, it's like holding an orb with like a depiction of a spider on it. It does have like these little like kind of like butterfly-esque or moth wings coming out of the back of its head. So it almost seems to be like either a fly that got merged with a human. And when we like look at it, it's a robe. I think it tends to resemble that of like a brain sucker. So I think early on in development, these things might have been related to amygdalae, or maybe like the kind of a transforming statues we find around these areas, but at least for the final version of the game with the DLC, these are probably supposed to be like related to the research hall patients. But there is nothing kind of confirming that link. That's just what makes the most sense to me. So feel free to disregard that if it doesn't really appeal to you personally. So there'll be a few more where I can show off like the little orb that it's carrying a bit better. And as we do come into Bergenworth, we will find like some of these kinds of interesting looking statues lining the pathway there, as well as some within the grounds itself. It seems like it shows like a bunch of people like in the midst of transforming, potentially into amygdalae. Although I think there's also good potential that this thing right here kind of resembles Ebrietas. Although it doesn't necessarily have like the kind of wings that it has, it does have like this like hook-like thing, which she does have. If you either way, like it doesn't match up Ebrietas or the amygdalae fully, just because amygdalae have many more limbs, obviously, and Ebrietas has those kinds of wings. And Metal Doji thinks they could be veiled Rams. That is also a very good possibility, especially because like with like the kind of like cratered kind of face that they've got going on. It's a possibility as well. I think it's just like the idea of like the infant experiments and all those like kind of things, just like kind of amalgamating into something that's never fully explained. And then we've also got statues of messengers holding up lamps, which is quite nice, because we can literally see the messengers holding up lamps in like the Nightmare Frontier area, as well as in the Chalice dungeons. Just a whole bunch of repeating imagery, really. And then we enter Bergenworth, the college itself. If you try to find where the moon was, it's no longer where it was. It doesn't actually seem to be in the sky above Bergenworth. It seems to be like beyond the building itself. And then, as I mentioned before, we've got those kind of statues repeating. Oh, and to summon for the Moderus Twin again. Okay, that's what I thought. I typically don't equip the League rune, so not used to seeing those summons there. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'll probably show off one of the Gardens of Eyes grab attacks, and then maybe I should cut it at this point, just because Bergenworth would probably be a good stepping point into the beginning of the next episode. So I'm going to kind of apologize for the kind of ear pain that I'm about to inflict on all of us, myself included, but I just want to share some crazy tinfoil with everybody. When you get grabbed by one of these Gardens of Eyes, in between like the insectoid screeching, you'll hear this kind of chiming sound that's reminiscent of bells. So here we go. So hopefully everybody heard that, and I think it's pretty similar to the kind of effect that we can get from like the doll when we go ahead and channel our blood echoes into her. This idea of a kind of chiming is also similar to the effects of Ariana's blood vial, and I think this could have been something which the choir was probably aware of, and that might have been part of the inspiration for the name, and being able to hear a kind of like holy song coming from high qualities of the blood, and or like the arcane in general, and that's why the idea of like bells holds such significance for like the healing church iconography. So just to kind of reinforce that, when we do channel up with the doll, we get that kind of similar sound effect, although not completely the same.
Welcome. What? Very well, let me...
So perhaps one cool thing about like the English localization is that idea of blood echoes might have a bit more weight and sustenance when we compare it to like the Japanese version of the word, which is closer to like the dying wills of blood. So I hope you guys enjoyed that stream. We're closing in at just about 3 hours, so I think this is a good point to stop. Heading into Bergenworth for the next episode and dealing with Rom and a lot of the really nitty-gritty intricacies of the translations of the notes there. So once again, I want to thank everybody for stopping by and supporting me throughout the stream. If you haven't, go ahead and please leave a follow if you want to catch us again. We're streaming every night from 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for about 3 hours, although I'm fine with going over when the content matches the need for it. And if you wanted to see more of this episode and you missed out, I do upload the VODs to YouTube, so they will be like permanently archived. And you could also check them on my Twitch channel while they're still active. So thank everybody for stopping by again, and have a good night.